Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
I'm Susan Dumais, a researcher in Microsoft Research, doing a lot of work in information retrieval. And it's my pleasure today to introduce William Jones, who's a professor in the Information School at the University of Washington. I've known William for almost 30 years. He did his graduate work at Carnegie Mellon in cognitive science with John Anderson, did a postdoc with several of us at Bell Labs, and our paths have crossed many ways over those years. William's a large part of the reason that I'm at Microsoft from Bellcore. We've collaborated on several things since he's been at University of Washington. And so today he's going to be here telling us about a body of work that he's been involved in for the last decade or so, I'd say, on helping people basically keep found things found, to improve the way in which they manage, organize, and use information. What he's going to talk about today, I think, is some of the newer developments in that, something having to do with a project manager, and mostly just try to frame this work on personal information retrieval in a broader picture. So, William, it's my pleasure.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, Sue was one of the original members of the Keeping Found Things Found group back when we got our first grant. And so I'm writing an article. I'm almost done with it, but I've been saying that now for a couple of months with the same title. And pardon me?
And you have a book by the first title. You should push.
Keeping Found Things Found. I have a book called Keeping Found Things Found, The Study and Practice of PIM. I don't know how many people have heard of personal information management. I know some of you have. Anybody else? Ed, you certainly have. But I don't see a lot of people. So a lot of people are sort of like, well, what the heck is that? And that was kind of my reaction the first time I let's see now, how come I'm not, oh, there we go. Okay. The first time actually, Mike Eisenberg, the former dean of the Information School, suggested, when I first started working with the Information School, back when I was just an adjunct professor, he said, well, it sounds like you're doing work on personal information management. I described what I'd been doing since my days at Carnegie Mellon doing memory research. And I thought, what the heck is personal information management? That's sort of everything, isn't it? And nothing, does it have anything meaningful behind it? And I've concluded since then that it does. So, and a lot of us have concluded that too, including Jamie, who just came in, who is, she and I co-edited a volume on personal information management. So basically, I like the title because the world is at our doorsteps in a lot of ways. Certainly digitally, we've got all sorts of ways to get at digital information, high bandwidth everywhere, not just at home, but when we travel. And we can also change our physical world too. Most of us make reservations online these days, and I did a thought experiment with a class at UW where I said, suppose you could, if somebody gave you $500,000 if you would stay in your apartment for the next year and not go outside. And they started thinking about it and said, yeah, I guess I could live with that. I'd order things through Amazon, and you can get groceries delivered through Amazon, so it's doable. I think one person stipulated an exercise machine, but beyond that, we can sort of reach out and we can do lots of things. And in fact, that's probably the way most of us affect change in the world around us, is through the information that we send and receive. But our houses our virtual houses are a mess. And so certainly our physical houses mine has lots of paper documents everywhere, and email inboxes are overflowing. I have lots of old memory sticks, and with all sorts of, there's something somewhere in our house with a priceless video recording of our son when he was 2.5 years old, saying that he was going to marry so-and-so, a friend of his. And I don't know, we don't know where that is. We recorded it, it's somewhere. For all we know, is it still around? We don't know. It's sort of there, but not there. So that's sort of part of this theme of keeping found things found. And then Kathy Marshall, with Microsoft, has done some work showing that people have old laptops and desktops with hard drives. They may not even be able to boot them anymore, but they don't dare get rid of them. First of all, there might be good information on there. Second of all, they certainly don't want that information to be falling into someone else's hands. And I see lots of nods from the audience. We all have our laptops that are lying around. And then there's also another phenomenon that we've probably experienced, that we can sort of be in the push and pull of a day and responding to email messages, going to meetings, and be totally exhausted at the end of the day. And then if our spouse or a friend says, so what'd you do? I don't know what I actually did, but I know I'm just exhausted. I was working every step of the way, but maybe not in ways that added up to anything. So that's what I think PIM is about as much as anything, is ordering our houses of information. And I think that there's a real desire that PIM should just go away. It's kind of like the garage that we can't park our car in anymore, or the messy closet that we open up and then quickly close again because we just don't want to think about it. It's kind of like eating your broccoli. It's like your parents telling you to straighten up your room. Why can't it just go away? But I think there's another side of that to say that we have tremendous opportunity here, especially in the domain of digital information, to do things that really make PIM just sort of work for us, make the things that we need to do just happen in the course of our interactions with our information in ways that wouldn't be possible with paper information. I came across this recently, and I thought it was an interesting definition. So personal information management, what's the management part? Well, manipulate. I like that. You're interacting with your information. That's an essential part of it. And I really like this definition, the art of getting things, the classic definition of management, corporate, is the art of getting things done through people. So what about PIM as the art of getting things done through information? What do you think? What do you think, Jamie? Put you on the spot. If you don't like it, we don't have to talk about it now, but I think it's kind of an interesting.
You left the person out of that one.
Pardon me? The art of getting things done, of the person, the art of one of us getting things done, and it probably needs to be.
Our information.
Exactly, yeah. But I just sort of wanted to substitute people with information and try it out, but obviously you want to be more specific about it. It's at a personal level. So anyway, to get to the point of today's talk, first of all, I want to provide an overview of what the Keeping Found Things group is doing these days, and also give a little slant to PIM. So I'll say that P is for a mapping, a very personal mapping that weaves together information and need, and I'll kind of come back to that later. And I'll say that I is for fragmentation. We talk a lot about information overload, but I think in a lot of cases what we think of as information overload is more aptly described as information fragmentation. And there are lots of examples of this. Sue and I are familiar with that from cognitive psychology. You can do chunking or you can do patterns, and something that's a buzzing confusion can all of a sudden coalesce into something that's meaningful to you. And I think that a real challenge is to do that with our information, to have it sort of coalesce in ways that are meaningful to us so that we're no longer overwhelmed by it. There's that effect that I've been looking for some research on that, but we have it probably when you hear people talking a foreign language, that it sounds like they're talking very fast sometimes. And the explanation for it that I've always thought was very interesting is that it's because we're processing at the phonetic level. If we're hearing English or a language we understand, we're processing at a higher level, so we're chunking. And if we're sort of measuring speed by the number of events, distinct events, there are fewer events. So in a real sense, so you apply that to PIM and you say, how should your information be organized? And then we've got M is for everyday living and managing our information along the way. This sort of gets back to the plasticity of digital information and how we can leverage the things that we're going to do anyway. So to be a lot smarter about how the information should be organized. So that's those are themes that drive the Keeping Found Things Found group. And so I'll review three things. I'm going to sort of reorder the letters here. The first is something called The Devil is in the Details, and this was a study comparing the use of tags and folders. The second is, and I'm just going to give you, I only have about 40 minutes left or 35 minutes, so I'm going to try to go through these fairly quickly. And then the second one is sort of very preliminary results from another study we're doing under a National Science Foundation grant. The first one was done under a Google award. And then I hope to spend a little bit more time on sort of a demo of the personal project planner. And if the demo fails, and we're pushing to get web release 2 out on that, and we have it available for download. So the upshot of that is I took a gamble and downloaded the current version from my developer, and that's always dangerous. So if that fails, I'll give you a quick demo of it. All right. So does that seem like a good plan for today? So here's the project, and we're calling it a group now because we have several projects. And these are the current people in the project. Dewey and Dean are the developers, and Elizabeth and Julia are on the fieldwork side. And so let's see. A brief history of KFTF is that it began back in 2001 under an NSF-funded project, and we were delighted to have Sue, one of our original team members, I remember you gave some very valuable feedback on the grant proposal that we first got funding through. And so that 3-year grants funded studies to look at how people keep information, how people refine information, and how people organize information. We were focused on the web, but we quickly realized that that you can't sort of bound things that way. That the things people need to do just quickly go beyond the web. So when we were looking at the web, for example, we would see one of the most common ways people keep information is to email a URL to themselves. And so we did a functional analysis looking at why people would do things like that, which was quite revealing. And it turned out that bookmarks were not quite as popular for a number of reasons. One thing about email, for example, is that if you're in the habit of checking your inbox, there's a reminder there. Whereas if you create a bookmark, you can easily forget it later. And we saw people repeatedly do that, out of sight, out of mind. They'd forget about it. We did a refining study where for various reasons, not just forgetfulness, but half of the time they could use a bookmark, they didn't when they were prompted to get back to information. So,
that's the average of a lot of people.
Pardon me?
Where do you get the low, medium, high from?
That's just we're sort of doing a functional analysis, so that's us deciding where the high, so reminding, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because this is published work going back, way back, but yeah, so for example, we've got reminding is high for email to self, but relatively low for bookmarks. And even now, I'm not aware of any systems where you can set a reminder on a bookmark, even though people forget about them. People forget about the bookmarks. Another thing about email is it encourages sort of a kind of a very casual expression of what you want. So you can sort of type in a few words, whereas if you have to sort of game the system when it comes to an old-fashioned bookmark. Nowadays you can do some of that with tags using something like Delicious. When we originally did the study, Delicious wasn't widely used. I'm not even sure it was, I don't think it was available until the year after. Anyway, and then we also did, in the final year, we did something and published something at Chi called Don't Take My Folders Away. And this is sort of the canonical example. We've seen this in several instances, but I'll have some disclaimers here as well. So this is an example from somebody planning her wedding, and just a folder structure in Windows. And what's really striking about it is, in a real sense, it's a problem decomposition. And that got us to thinking, well, what are the folders about? And we did this sort of, we called it the Google question. Suppose you can get back to your information just by typing in a couple of words. Can we take away your folders? And people said, absolutely not, because the folders turned out to represent a lot of things beyond just a way to get back to information. They were a summary. They were a way of managing tasks. They were a reminder of things to be done. Even though none of that was really designed into the use of folders to begin with, that was how people were using folders. So that got us thinking about a lot of things, and I'll sort of come back to that later when we talk about the planner. So I is for fragmentation. So this is an illustration from the book. I think it really aptly describes a lot of us. You know, sometimes we don't dare touch an email message because we know that can easily mushroom into, oh, I better check this. So I had one recently where our personnel person said, so how long do you want this job application to be up for? And I said, well, I thought I'd already said something about that, but I better go back and check what I'd said before to be sure I'm consistent. And then I thought, well, maybe I should email somebody. And I started to email, and then I said, no, I should figure this out on my own because I was on the post of the job application. So then I'm back, and so on and so on and so forth. You know, it's sort of, sometimes they can easily mushroom into so an email message that looked like it would only take a few minutes can end up taking a half an hour or more. And Victoria Bellotti has done some good work on that, showing that can happen. The other thing about fragmentation is that even simple decisions sometimes require that you go in many different places to look at distinct forms of information. So can you take a job candidate to dinner next Thursday? Well, it's kind of your turn to do it, isn't it? So you'd like to be able to say yes. But, or think of another scenario. Anyway, you'd like to be able to say yes, but where do you check? Well, you check electronic calendar, but you know, that's not enough. You might check your email messages because you might have made a commitment in email. And if you're sharing a household with other people, still one of the most common ways to communicate is through not an electronic calendar, but a paper calendar. And you've got web pages. Maybe you wanted to go to some conference next week and you want to check and make sure that's there, and you may have your child's soccer schedule. So those are all distinct forms of information, and that's part of the fragmentation we deal with, even to make fairly simple decisions. And the interesting thing about that is that, you know, oftentimes, sometimes 4 out of 5 isn't good enough. 4 out of 5, you can say, yes, I can make it, and then the 5th one is what presents you with the conflict and the double booking. Okay, so that's a segue into the first study I'm going to talk about today, and this is done under a Google award, and Andrea Sivan was the lead on that, and she did a really nice job. Basically, people have been talking for a long time about folders versus tags, but it turns out there's just not that much empirical information about it. So we decided to do something and to sort of investigate that. And the tagline is "Devil is in the details." So what we did was we originally said, well, heck, we can just hack up, you know, folders versus tags, so that's no problem. Then we started thinking, you know what? No, we can't. There's a lot of little things that are just going to be an enormous drain of our resources. And at the end, anything we find out may be more an artifact of our poor implementations than of anything else. So what we decided to do, we sort of had a nice convenient comparison here. Sort of the simplified web versions of both Gmail and Hotmail provided us with a comparison of two metaphors: placing into folders versus tagging with labels. And I think some of us, many of us would think that tagging would be a clear winner? Okay. How many think that folders might be a winner? Okay, so it's not, you know, some places you'd probably get tagging, obviously. Folders are so outmoded. Why do you say folders?
Because tagging is a lot more work for me. I have to think of the tags and make sure they don't duplicate them. There are some tools which help you look at earlier tags, but by and large, I don't know whether they call it personal information management or PIM or whatever they call it. So for me, folders are conceptually easier.
Okay. Anybody else want to make some comments about that? Yeah.
You'll sometimes have pieces of information that you really kind of want to put into two folders.
So you're a tagging advocate. Yeah, you're a tagger. All right. Jonathan, and then boy, this is good discussion. Jonathan, and then
individual differences. Interviewing people on how they deal with email, I would think that some will.
There's certainly individual differences. Yeah. But what about your own individual differences? Where would you come down on that, tagging versus folders, for yourself?
Good question.
All right, we'll come back. Yeah.
Well, for email, I think I prefer folders, but for other types of things like photos, tagging, I think is
tagging. Yeah. So individual differences, and it also these are all really good points, and so. We're probably going to make you very dissatisfied because we only scratched the surface of that. Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a long history of people using folders, so they're more familiar with it.
Yeah.
And also the interfaces for the tagging is not as advanced as it will eventually be.
That's right.
Eventually tagging folders are a restricted form of tagging.
One more comment and then we'll move on.
I use rules to tag my incoming email quite a bit, but then I definitely want to be able to collect it by tag and jam it in a folder, so I would definitely like to have both.
You like to have both? Well, yeah, that's the right answer, I suppose, is why not have both? But the question is, how should they combine together? And, yeah.
For me, search is the ultimate form of tagging. Every word is a tag.
Every word is a tag.
So if I have folders and search, then I'm happy land.
Yeah. Okay.
Although I would
And our
say
folders
you have to know
especially
what
tag.
to look for.
Yeah, yeah.
What if I don't know what the content is?
Yeah.
You
Let's.
have to know the tags too.
Well, but if I've organized by folders, then I've explicitly
No,
said.
Yeah.
Folders
I'm gonna-
Individual differences.
I'm going to. Yeah, that's right.
Strongly held.
This is well, this is, I think, to quote, was it Bork who said that, the Supreme Court nominee? This is a thing about which reasonable people can differ. So, but let's go on. I will say one thing in favor of.
I think there's a really important difference between the functionality that current tag and folders support, which I think are actually fairly different, and then the way in which they're implemented.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think if they're implemented well,
Yeah. Well, no, but that's also sort of it goes back to what Jonathan was saying too, that it's not a matter of either or, it's a matter of both and maybe more, okay? And what should that be? And how should the two combine with each other? You don't just you don't necessarily just slap tags onto folders and say, okay, we're done. And yeah.
Just a very, very quick thing, which
Yeah.
is I think related to what Marty mentioned as well, which is just sort of the ways in which they're implemented now and the logical ways in which they could be implemented are very different.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, the idea
Yeah.
of, for instance, somebody mentioned, well, is it PIM or is it Principal Information Manager or whatever? Well, the same could be true of folders or anything else. It's just sort of the way in which they're exposed and how you apply them.
Well,
And
yes,
they-
there is. So, and that is that's a real challenge with this. There was we do cite in the paper, it's going to be presented at ASIST in October. We cite a work by Pock and others, and they get into some fairly quantitative differences between tagging and folders. But the problem is that it's so much of it is so easily dismissed by differences in the way. I mean, they had differences in the implementation. They sort of had this paper and pencil way of dealing with your folders and with your tags, and it's like, well, how much of this is really just an artifact of the implementation? So. It's tough, and we wanted to get as close as possible to the underlying metaphor, which is, if it's the metaphor in the folder is put that there, and if it's there, it's not over here. This is not quantum mechanics. It's not. It's right there. Okay, so that's. I'm probably doing havoc to the sound system, but. So that is whereas tagging obviously has lots of that's more like label this. If you go around with a label maker in a physical space, you could sort of give things as many labels as you want. So that's what we try to stick as close to as possible. And we had this sort of a method that actively involved people in a within subject comparison of the two. So we gave them both, and we had them keep a log of their experiences with both over a period of 5 days with. Where each day they got 5 articles in each condition, the label, this condition, and the folder condition, on projects of their choice. And so basically, 10 participants, not many participants, but then this is an expensive study to set up. And we were after qualitative comparisons. It wasn't like we're going to, at the end of the day, say we have statistical significance here. We weren't after that. We were after qualitative differences that we would have overlooked if we just sort of thought about it. Okay, and so we're kind of letting people be smart in ways that we couldn't, and get a reasonable sampling of the ways in which they can do it. So, so basically, we had people select 2 projects from a list of 10, and we kind of based them on things under So You Wanna. If you've ever seen that website, So You Wanna Run a Marathon. They had they have a lot of things up there. They have So You Want to Do a Sex Change Operation, but we didn't have that as one of the projects. And then for each project, people received 5 how-to articles on each of 5 successive days. Okay, and so email really, the point wasn't to look at email. The point was to use email as a delivery vehicle for this information, as a way to control that. And as a way to very roughly sort of simulate what happens to a lot of us. We don't get our information all neatly packaged at one time. It's sort of distributed over time. So that's and here's here are the list of things that we let them choose from. Just things that you might. And basically we asked them to pick things that they didn't know about or didn't know that much about, but were interested in. So they picked 2 of those, and then we randomly assigned, or semi-randomly. We tried over people to sort of balance so that the same project was represented a roughly equal number of times in each of the 2 conditions, hotmail and or label and folder. Some things to say about this. The study was exploratory. We've already talked about that. So we did some quantitative comparisons too. We had, at the end, we had them recall 3 facts about each of the topics that they'd picked, and then we also gave them a cued recall test. But we didn't get that many huge differences between them. Yeah.
Could the information that they were sent to be applied to multiple?
No. I mean, the projects were meant to be, the projects were meant to be clear. First of all, they only had 2 projects or topics, and we call them projects because they were sort of structured that way, run a marathon. And no, they were clearly distinct from each other. Okay. Yeah.
Do you think whatever your results, would they have been more different when you run the recall test, like 2 months later?
Yeah, sure. And we just didn't have time. I mean, that's a really interesting. I mean, there are all sorts of interesting things. We just sort of scratched the surface on it. So you're absolutely right. And clearly, 25. That's not very much, is it? So, we wish we could have had the time to sort of. But it was a very small study. Google didn't give us that much money, so it was enough to keep us going, and that's what we did. So I'm going to move on to some of the results. Well, just to so within subjects, I mean, I'm a cognitive psychologist by training, and within subjects has maybe a more specific meaning here than it does here, so I'm putting it in quotes. I'm not sure if I'm violating some sense of what it's defined to be, but basically participants are experiencing both conditions, and we're asking them to actively engage in thinking about the 2 conditions and writing down their impressions of each. And then 2 actual systems, and then people worked overtime on their own computers in their own workspaces. So we wanted, and that's sort of a general problem methodologically, I think, with PIM, is that you're not going to get much about PIM, I think, from bringing people into a laboratory where they're away from their information, working on someone else's computer, working in an environment different from theirs, and certainly not in a one-shot deal. It's very much you have to be thinking about the life cycle of information. So, sort of results. Well, there's some similarities between placing and tagging with respect to retrieval performance. Not much difference. It seemed like people were able to recall a little bit more in the tagging condition, but it was certainly not significant by any means. We weren't expecting it to be, but it wasn't. It was minor, and I'm not even going to go into those numbers. There was kind of an interesting similarity in an organizational scheme over time. So where are the interesting differences? They're with regards to sort of essential activities of PIM, keeping and organizing information, and refining information. And I'll drill down into those differences now. So on the keeping and organizing side, we saw things that the people sort of nicely expressed, better than we could have, maybe, I don't know, but better than we could have, were trade-offs between cognitive and physical efforts. So, one thing about tags versus folders. Well, if folders, if it's apples or oranges, you have to decide. It's going to be one or the other. You can't have both. Whereas tags, you can, sure, it's both. I'll tag with both. But then once you start tagging with both, you have to be consistent. You have to consistently do that. So we sort of express that as a difference between cognitive versus physical effort. It really kind of focuses the mind if you have to decide one folder that it goes into. But on the other hand, if you say both, then that's more manual effort over time. And we have quotes for each of those. With tags, it's easier to work through and pick more tags. But with folders, I kind of had to think, does this really fit in this category? On the other hand, they said, I felt like I spent more time on tags just because I had to apply multiple tags. So I had to apply one, and then the next, and then the next. And so, we've got both of those expressions. We also got trade-offs between hiding information and visibility. And that was a really interesting one. With folders, I don't like the things to get hidden away, and then I might miss something important. On the other hand, one problem with Gmail, I think they've got a new feature now that lets you sort of filter on things that aren't tagged. But one thing people expressed as a frustration with Gmail is that they couldn't move things out of the inbox. And so it was always there. They could filter away things, or they could highlight things, or they could explicitly tag. But what people really liked doing was, or some people at least, is to say, okay, once I move something out of the inbox into a folder, I processed it at some level, so it's done. So what's left in the inbox is stuff that I still have to get to, okay? And so we see quotes there expressing both of those, okay? On the refining side, there are trade-offs between, well, we called it between flexible and systematic search. So apples and oranges, you're not sure which. Well, with tags you can look under both and have a reasonable chance of getting at it. But on the other hand, if you want to say, I know this is in there somewhere, I know this, I remember seeing this article, it's in there somewhere, you want to do an exhaustive search, it's harder to do with tags than with folders because you keep on seeing the same articles again and again that you've already eliminated. And so in a sense, folders, well, not in a sense, the folders are a partition, okay? MISI. So mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. And so anyway, trade-offs in refining queues also. Folders are visual. Now, it was interesting that they said that because I don't think there's much visually different between folders in Hotmail and tags in Gmail. I really don't. So I think they might have been extrapolating a little bit on that. But it was interesting that there was a visual component to folders that they, and I don't know whether that's just because it's so deeply ingrained in us to think of folders as putting something there so that it really engages a location metaphor. I don't know what, but that's a quote. And then, but on the other hand, in Gmail at least, with tags, they would be at the beginning of an email message, so you could sort of, it was describing. It was a way of enhancing the description. So we were, this by the way is a one participant. We also had this kind of nice way of representing what's going on, which we thought was pretty useful to sort of see the evolution of a mapping over time. Either for folders, and this is for one person, for folders running a marathon, and for labels publishing a book, okay? And what you have here is everything happening on day 1 is coded with red, on day 2 with orange, 3 a yellow, 4, you get the idea. So, and what that sort of, it's a nice, we had this like, how do we figure out what's going on? And this gave us a nice way of visualizing what was going on. So you can sort of see that somebody originally had, well, these are, the dashed ones are things that they eliminated. They got rid of those links. And so, and then they got rid of marathon there. So they deleted that. And then what they did instead was, for folders, they kind of built something into the names to sort of, in a sense, represent this part-whole relationship. It's all about marathon, but I want to specialize marathon events, training, and diet. They started out with just marathon and realized that wasn't going to give them the distinction they wanted. So
this is really an evolution of their...
Yeah, it's an evolution. So you can sort of, at a glance, you can sort of see the evolution. And you can also, for any these are items over here. I should have made that clear. These are items, and these are folders, the names of folders. So you can sort of see obviously for items, you see what you would expect, that there's only one line going to that because it only goes to one folder. Whereas in the tagging condition, you can see that people did use more than one label, although not a whole lot more than one.
Did you see interesting evolution? So like in the one case, you see a structure getting set up earlier and being more or less malleable.
Yeah.
And it's only a week, but
we sort of had this inclination that the structures seem to be more stable in the label condition, but we're not sure of that, which was sort of counterintuitive for us. But the other truth is that we still have to go back and look at that data in more detail. We haven't had a chance to analyze that.
So did anyone make hierarchical clusters?
Hierarchical clusters? Well, and of course, neither system supports the hierarchical arrangement of either folders or tags. But what you do is you get some effect of that in things like this. They're sort of building it into the name itself. And then what we also asked people to do, which we thought was the most fun part of this, is we asked them to sketch their understanding at the end of that time. And so you get sketches here or here that show a lot more representational richness than you could achieve with either folders or tags. And you know what? I guess I could have just given a talk about this.
Go for another 20 or 25 minutes.
Yeah. So this is another example. And from someone else, their understanding of writing a book proposal. So they've got pre-publishing, query, letter, book proposal, nonfiction, author, agent, publisher. I mean, they've basically mapped this out. It's a little bit of a, it's crude, but it's a flow of how things are going to happen. And that intrigued us. I was thinking, well, gee, maybe rather than have a drop-down list of tags or folders, you could give people the ability to arrange things. I mean, that's not rocket science. It's just simple graphs. Give people an ability to arrange things as they see them, whether it's tags or folders, and then for any particular item, just sort of click on the one. So it's basically you're using the graphical arrangement of the tags as a way of, as a menu. Yeah.
Although, I mean, it seems like your tasks really lend themselves to this kind of thing, because at least the ones I remember seeing were, you want to do this, and there's like an end goal associated with it. So there's all the things you do leading up to this goal. And so
they lend themselves to sort of a workflow in some cases.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it seems like your tasks tend to, maybe push toward that end, whereas I can imagine other kinds of informational tasks.
Well, I can imagine what I would say is I can imagine for other kinds of topics, you see a different representation. Okay. But I'll wager for any of them, you give people an ability to simply draw something, and they're going to come with something a lot richer than anything they could realize, even with the most creative use of tag names or folder names. Yeah?
I guess I was wondering that too, but you could also imagine that a person would draw you a list. And that's clearly not what they did. So it wasn't a sort of step-by-step, here's what I need to do to write a book, but...
No, it's not, it's kind of...
two-dimensional rather than just one.
But the other interesting thing about that is they draw that and that's theirs. I mean, they have some understanding of that. So, it made me start thinking about, well, suppose you had, you presented them with, here's your list of folders, here's your list of tags. Now just do a simple draw, click to arrange them a little bit like, well, there's some commercial applications that do something like that with your folders. But the point would be not necessarily to get too carried away about it, but then present that instead of a simple drop-down. Why not? I mean, how much more expensive could it be? And then they can click on that for any particular item as a way to quickly to get. Anyway, that's something that, and we sort of carry that through in a slightly different way in our thinking about the personal project planner. Anyway, that's one study. Any other questions, comments? So obviously there's a lot more to do there, but we thought we got a lot of mileage out of 10 participants through this within subjects manipulation, and none of the things that we list there qualitatively, with all of them, is sort of like, yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, they all sort of had, they seemed clear after the fact, but we would not have gotten half of them if we just sort of sat down ahead of time. Maybe if we'd called all of you into a room, we could have gotten some larger percentage. But the fact is, some of those things are only clear over time. Like, oh, it's really cool to be able to do apples and oranges. Well, not after the third or fourth or the fifth time. Okay, some things are only evident after a period of time.
Very methodological question, and maybe if you could do it again, kind of thing. Is these were sort of special accounts that they had set up that then you were feeding them and stuff, right? They weren't getting other kinds of stuff in the flow. Right?
That's right. These were special accounts.
And so were you feeding them any noise email as well? Like,
no, we thought about doing that. But
do you think that would have changed how you fit things? I mean, I guess if it's pure noise, then they just pitch it. It's fine. Go ahead. Because it seems like that's one of the interesting things you hear people talk about when they make these things has to do with scale.
We thought about doing that. I mean, we had some real problems just getting past the junk filters to begin with, and so it's sort of indeterminate what's going to happen. You don't know, So we just get, but we did think about that, and it just was too problematic. Okay. So conclusions, don't leave the good stuff behind. Filter for example, something as simple like in Gmail, give them the option of showing only untagged items. Okay, if that's the way people like to manage their workflow, then support it. Support hierarchy was really became clear with both with tags and with folders. People need hierarchy. Well, they did. We did have some quotes that they asked for it, and we also see it in the choice of words that they're really trying to jury-rig that. And also, if you go back, I guess we were talking about. We were talking back to your workflow thing. We didn't always get a workflow. We got here. Here was someone else publishing a book, and they sort of had this Venn diagram. Okay, instead. So that worked for them. That's what they did. And over here they had a hierarchy. I would call this a hierarchy. Marathon, and then under that diet and events. And you can see that up here. It's basically that's what they're trying to do and can't given the constraints of the UI. On your
last slide, there's been a lot of literature on how people organize email, and I think that's qualitatively different than how they organize other kinds of information, because as you said, there's a task handling aspect of email. So I'm not quite sure that you should generalize tagging versus folders to other, I mean, I know you said this at the beginning, but to other tasks like labeling images on Flickr or web pages. Because it's not usually a task management application at the same time.
Right. We did our best to sort of minimize the email aspect of things. So we sort of, it was just a, but
off thing is most definitely an email.
Which one is that?
The wanting to have it done and processed.
Oh no, definitely that. Yeah, that is. Although, yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah, that one is. Yeah.
The thing I want to say is when you get to these richer representations, then you're getting into that whole sense-making realm, and a lot of the evidence on sense-making is that as people continue the sense-making process, the representation has to change. So if you start getting really rich representations like that, then they're going to want to probably undo them.
That's a very good point.
You really have to differentiate rich ones from these very simple folders and tagging.
No, that's a very good point, and that's. I mean, I think that's an unsolved problem. You draw something, and then obviously over time it's out of date. So how do you? I mean, it's sort of this raised to sort of a higher degree, really. You have to create folders or tags as you're going along, and at some point you're going to look back and say, wait a minute, that's not really the way I see things anymore. So then you're in this sort of agonizing choice between. Between doing everything over again or sort of living with something that it no longer is really reflective of how you're doing things.
The rich, that the next slide you have where there's the complex, process diagram, which is much harder to change and more specific.
I don't know if it's much harder to change. I don't know about that. I mean, I think that's in some ways, what you have in something like this, but that's something that maybe we should take offline. But I think, suppose you can just sort of see this and say, well, that's actually over here now. And I mean, it depends on the nature of the changes, obviously. But you might say, well, I don't really call it agent anymore. I call it something else. I mean, some changes are easy. Some changes are not so easy. But.
They probably are really clueless and they start out completely wrong. Whereas someone who's written lots of books has this down pat.
No. But what I'm saying is it's not clear to me that a representation like this would be harder to change than a representation based on simple tags or folders. That's not clear to me. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, support hierarchy, support collections of tags that are MECE. I mean, that was another thought. If you're going to go with tags, maybe you should have. I mean, essentially, you're also saying that there are relationships between tags. One of them is maybe a hierarchical relationship. Another is a relationship that says these tags are, they establish a partition, okay? And male or female, animal, vegetable, mineral, those are sort of partitions. And then active engagement of people in direct comparison of conditions can be very useful. So that, we're thinking about using that in other places too, where we would like to. I mean, obviously, you're never going to find existing systems out there that they're probably not going to come as neatly close to direct comparison as Hotmail and Gmail. But the question is, can you instruct the jury to disregard these irrelevant things and focus on these key differences, and then try it over time and get their insights? Okay, now we're on to the mapping, and we're already into discussion period, so I don't know what to do about this. Mapping. This is also from the book, but the point of this is to say a lot of our daily lives are at the level of keeping and finding activities. I give you something. I give you a business card, or I say, here, check out this article. That's a keeping. You have to make a keeping decision. Do I pay attention to this or not? You get new email. Do you answer it or not? Or do you, that's a keeping decision. It's sort of broadly defined as, do you attend to it, and if so, what do you do, and how do you handle it? And on the other hand, you have a need. You have a need to call someone up, so you're doing a finding activity. You're going from need to information. And a lot of our daily lives are just at that level. One of my colleagues at the university said, Karen Fisher called it hookups and lookups. I thought that was nice. You're looking up information and you're trying to hook up with the information you do get so that you'll get back to it later. And then there are these meta-level activities that sort of more focused on the mapping. And so aspects of that are like schemes of organization. And we all have them. We all have schemes for organizing, whether they're with tags or folders. And we change them over time. There are the structures that result from that as well. There's strategies for managing time and energy and information flow. I had a colleague at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm who said, I don't keep any email messages, even though that's his area, Ulla Belter, that's his area of expertise. But he says, I don't keep any email messages. I just, if I need an email message, I'll ask one of my colleagues for it later. Well, that might work if you're if you're an engaging guy like Ulla and you don't ask too often. People are sort of going to say, sure, I can forward that to you. Pardon?
You worked with somebody else.
Tom, I know. Yeah, it works if you're in a position of power too. Not that Tom ever, but so at any rate, there's strategies. Strategies like I close my door. There's somebody at the university who says I never deal with email on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's a strategy for managing flow. Supporting tools and a system that brings them all together. So we've done this. This is another short paper being presented at ASIST by Elizabeth Jones, no relation to me. And she's a PhD student at the university. And we're really, it's a part of a larger study with NSF looking at projects as a unit of analysis for PIM research. And obviously it's too big to just sort of say, well, how do you do PIM? So that doesn't work. So. But on the other hand, if you partition along the lines of applications, that's not a good idea either. Email, well, why? That's sort of buying into current partitions that when that's not necessarily, that sort of perpetuates the problem. So we looked at projects as a way to bring together lots of different kinds of information. And good grief, we've got this long procedure over many, many days, weeks, where we pick a project in somebody's life, and we have several different ways of asking them about the project and what's going on. And I'm just going to gloss over this study because it's such a provocative thing. So we found different ways, basically, why do systems fail? Why does a system fail in your life? The New Year's Eve resolution system that you had such great hope for in January, and now it's July and you're not using it anymore. And if it's a physical system for filing papers, that's painfully obvious. You see lots of a growing stack of things waiting to be filed, for example. It's not so obvious in the digital case, but there are signs that it's breaking down. And so anyway, so we've got various factors. One is visibility for the failure in the short run to do something. I need, so basically, if it's not there, they won't use it. So I need something constantly visual to me. So I have that with a paper pad, but not with the task pad in Outlook. That's one person's comment. Integration is another thing. If it sort of integrates into something else you're already doing, you're more likely to use it. Over the long run, there are things like scalability, and we can all relate to that. This person talked about it in the context of Microsoft Project. She said it's good for working on one particular project, and that's a very generous comment. I haven't heard many people say that even, but when you get four or six, then it's really hard to balance between them. So, and then return on investment. People sort of start off with something, and after a while they gradually start to say, I'm just not getting anything out of this. I'm putting a lot into it. We thought we call it co-adoption, but it's really a social factor that really goes on in a lot of systems. And this is probably something near and dear to your heart, Jonathan. It's one of the, and this is a great quote. It's one of those deals where at a certain point you realize you're throwing effort after nothing, and you stop doing it. It means nothing to other people. So if I'm not doing it for myself, why bother? Sort of people are. There's a little bit of edge in this this quote. And we've also interviewed other people who, for example, do an elaborate tagging of things on Flickr, on photographs, that will ultimately be beneficial to them. But it's not motivated by any thoughts that they want to get back to the information later. It's motivated by a social aspect. They want to bring people to their photographs to get comments. So we're very intrigued by the social aspect of PIM and how to motivate people to do things. So everyday living, what do we say there? Well, there are various ways you can do that. You can sort of record what people are doing and make use of it. Or sort of do things case by case, so that smaller pieces, if you're an onerous task, you can break it into smaller pieces. But what we're really interested in is, on the planner is, people don't necessarily most people don't think it's a lot of fun to organize their information, but some people like to plan. All of us have to plan whether we like it or not. Planning is a part of life. So the thought is, let's support people in planning and have information organized as an incidental byproduct. And so this is something we're going to be submitting to WIST. There's also a paper that we presented at CHI, a short paper at CHI in Florence. So new ways of working with the same old file system. I'll go to the demo now. Let's see. The question we ask is, can an effective organization just happen as a part of project planning? So what we have, I'll just show it to you. Actually, I guess I need to. So I'm actually using this now, the planner, even though it's still very much a prototype. Let me just find. So this is a view of all of my projects, and if I can look at one of them, submit to WIST, for example, and okay. I think I just opened two different views of that, but this will probably get the point across. So, so what is this? This is basically, it looks like a mess to you probably, but it's basically a view of my files and folders. But it's a document-like view. It sort of looks like an outline view in Word. And as I create new headings in here, so there are headings and subheadings, what I basically see are underneath our new folders and subfolders being created. So the idea is that I'm kind of planning the video demo, for example, that we're going to do for WIST, and I do things like I've got this hints for making a good video. I can do things like drag and link to bring things in here. I can drag information in, and it's linked back to the source, and I can get back to the source easily enough. The same thing with email messages. So here I have an email message to somebody about we're talking about using Adobe Captivate, and so I just drag that in there. I can either drag the whole email message in, or I can sort of select the whole item and drag it in and have a hyperlink back to it, or I can just drag in a few key sentences. So one idea here is that I can take an email thread that maybe has gone on and on and on, and just pick the resolution. For example, Jonathan, you and I were involved in a threaded conversation like that, where we finally came to a resolution, and I can drag that in and say, okay, now we're going to meet at 5:30 at such and such a place, and have that resolution, but also have the link back to the source, so that I can go back and say, well, why didn't we consider some other? Why are we doing that again? So that's sort of the idea. Is so that's drag and link. That's one way of sort of. The overall overriding idea here is to have all of our information, regardless of its form, whether it's email or Word documents or Excel documents or web pages, all of it together. Everything that you need to have in order to do a project is right there in front of you.
What does the green mean?
Pardon me?
This line in green, is it just a selection?
Oh, that is the most recent document. So we sort of have in this view. One problem we have is that we can move things around in this view because it's a document view. So we have this, for example, we have this sort of home remodeling file, and we can move that up and down as we want to. But one problem with that is that we can't easily flip a switch and say, show us the most recent. So this is our way of doing that.
There are lots of views you might want on it. So one view you might want is pending tasks. Another you might want is the order in which things should have happened, so that you can reuse it for other things.
Right. No, the thing what this sort of got us to thinking was, this sort of says now, once you sort of open the door a little bit on this idea that you can have this overlay to the file system, breathe new life into a tired file system, and that through that you can do a lot of things. You can sort of manage, you can still manage your information, but you can also do other things, like we also support calendar reminder, for example. So video 3 minutes, maybe I'll say it is due by tomorrow, So I'll put that in there. I think I've already had done that one other place, but I'll sort of say, do a 3-minute video. So now that's in here, and if I go, so one thing you can also start to do is you can start to log, in sort of basic ways, you can sort of log what you're doing. So, and if I go back there on Friday, I see, so I've got that, the video demo, and if I open that up, what we have now is, task reminders are great, but they don't give you much by themselves. They're sort of inert. What we have is a link back to the information you need in order to complete that. And except for now we don't have a way to go back to the plan now, so that we go back to the underlying folder. But you can also, this is a good place also to show you that everything you saw in that plan is reflected here as a folder. And if I create a new, folder, like maybe I'll say, if it's it's gonna complain about me. Okay, so there's a document open. So, but if it's accepted, we're going to have to think about travel, for example, and hotels, for example. Okay, so now if I and then I might make some notes to myself. So I might say, I don't know, send an email for recommendations on hotels, to so and so. Okay. And what you see here is, sure enough, there's travel, okay, and there's a folder, and hotels is under that. And we also have this thing called an XML file. How do we realize this rich, this sort of document-like view? We basically distribute XML files, one per folder, and we dynamically reassemble them to create the view. You don't see the notes here. One of the frustrations I often experience is if I put everything project-related into a folder, I want to make notes about that too. The only way I can do that is to create a file in the folder, but that's not, that's awkward for me sometimes. But here I can just type notes in freehand, as many as I want. And I can also, I could also send an email to someone in here. Let's see if this works. All right, I'll email myself, asking for recommendations. Well, I'm not going to bother spelling it right, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I do that. And now later I can go back and say, well, did I ever get back to myself on recommendations? That's a common thing we have in email. And I sent an email message, did they ever get back to me? Well, I can troll through my sent mail folder, or maybe I blind copied myself, but neither of those is a very effective way to do that over time. It's just tedious. But in the context of a plan, that's when I can say, well, I remember sending it as I was thinking about hotels. Okay, so it's a natural thing here to go back, and I can leverage a feature of Outlook to say, well, find related messages. Okay, and so you get the idea. That's sort of that alone is an extremely powerful feature in my opinion, just to sort of be able to get back to those responses. Now, over time, you can obviously think of other things. Well, if you do that, why not bring that information in? So wouldn't it be cool if you saw this view and there was a little icon saying, indicating that there has been a response, and then you could click on that to get the responses. That'd be pretty cool. So another thing that we'll do, I'll sort of show you the sequence. Another thing we're doing is a lot of times we exchange documents back and forth. We do that all the time in academia. People do it in business too sometimes, even if they have a central SharePoint system. They'll sort of say, okay, here I've marked it up and now it's your turn. Back and forth, back and forth. What do we do then with that? We've got an email message, and this is something, it's not a new problem. Victoria Bellotti tried to address it in what's the name of the system? I can't think of it now. Anyway, she tried to address it in that bringing email to task, and Taskmaster, that was it. Great name. This idea that you want the attachment to be there as sort of as its own file. You want to have a location for that, but you don't want it to be completely separate from the email message. So you sort of want both. So what we do is, this is sort of illustrated here. You can just first of all, I sent an email message to somebody, and I got back responses. So here's the response. When I dragged that response in, it preserved a shortcut back to Outlook and to the message in Outlook, but it also created a separate note for the attachment itself, and that actually now resides in the file system, okay? And then what I did here is I created a new version of that because I'm very, maybe a little bit compulsive about this, but I created a new version with sort of indicating my changes. So I add WJ1 on the end of it just so that, and then I make my modifications and then I send it back in another email message, okay? Back to the person. So I can sort of show this if that's sort of the way it should work, and I can show you. Well, I'll say yes to that. Let's see. I'll just show you how it actually works, so you can, we'll see if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I know that it worked just a few minutes ago, or an hour or so ago. Let's see. Let's find a good attachment here. So you sort of have to. Yeah, here's one. So this is from one of my developers. So if I drag this in here. So what you see there is that it has both the message and the attachment above it. We decided to go up instead of down. We had a big discussion about this, and we decided you have to go up. You want everything to, these are meant to be sort of sometimes roughly corresponding to tasks, subtasks, or tasks of a project. And we wanted to be able to go up to a task and then immediately know what's the current status of things, where's the action right now. So this is sort of the idea. We have drag and drop. We have in-context create. I showed you in-context create of an email message. You just click here. One basic advantage of that is that if you want to send an email message, you don't have to go to the inbox to do that. You can just create it here. And if you go to the inbox, you're inevitably going to get distracted by other email messages. Oh, well, so-and-so, what does they want? It'll only take a minute, I'll just respond. And then you're completely taken out of the planning that you're doing for this project. And then I also tried to do about the other side of that once you send it, you also have a link to it in the plan so that if you want to, you can go back to it later without having to troll your sent mail folder. In-context create also works for documents as well, so you can do an in-context create of a Word document or an Excel document. And then drag and link works for a variety of different kinds of information, sort of to bring things in. And I think that's it. I'm just going to wrap up now. Sorry for going over, but let's see if I can resume the. Is there any option from the current slide? Let's hope that works. No, that doesn't work. All right. Okay. Let's see. Let's end this. I just wanted to go to the concluding slides. So we've talked about a drag and link is sort of outside in, and in-context create is inside out. Two design principles. No new organization. Well, in a sense, it is a new organization, but it is just it's a direct mapping onto your file system. Ultimately, we would imagine this as just being a part of the file system. You'd have the classic views, details, list, and you'd have the project view. And obviously, you can imagine something beyond just an outline view. You can imagine workflow views. You can imagine and/or decision trees. All sorts of things are possible. The point is they can just be an overlay onto the file system. And the other thing is organized incidentally. Project-related information is organized as a byproduct of a plan's elaboration. We've got some nice comments from participants and some evaluations we've done. It is out there for download. We're doing a major new release in the next few days. And so I invite you to give it a try. It's out on the Keeping Found Things Found website. To conclude, we sort of said P is a destination, better personal mapping, and the starting point is information readily available, which is good, but very fragmented, which is bad. And what we're saying is, why not provide tools that enable us to sort of make sense of our information as an integral part of our daily lives? And so I guess that's the conclusion.
You're around for another 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you want to read on, there's the book Jamie and I did, or Keeping Found Things Found. And there's also Tales of PIM is a website we've set up for discussion. And then there's also the Keeping Found Things Found website at the university where you can download the planner if you want to give it a try. Okay.
Tell me something about, you said the green line was the most recent thing.
But it wasn't the most recent. The one above us.
Right. So as you were adding stuff in there, those things.
Yes. Yes. It's not dynamic yet. So basically, if we I can show you. It should work. Here, let's. You've got good eyes there. I think what happens. I mean, obviously, we have a problem updating it as you're doing things. But I think what would happen is so we can do this. Basically, this refresh. And let's see what happens now. That's still not the most recent. So that's a bug. You know, that's a bug. We're working on it. We have a fairly crude way of determining most recent because there's some obvious questions about that. Most recent with respect to what, you know, and we do it just very crudely with respect to file type now. So anyway, any other questions?
I'm just curious. Are you familiar with the product called Personal Brain?
Yeah.
Because over the years, I used it, abandoned it, used it, abandoned it, used it, abandoned it. And
well, you know, that's the funny thing about it. There's something there that brings you back, but it doesn't quite work. I know when I try it, it's like I end up making a big mess of things. And what is good about it? Well, it's you can. Why don't you describe it?
Well, it actually, the latest versions of it actually meet a lot of the criteria you're talking about. It's like a mind map, except instead of a central thought that's static, anytime you click on something, it goes to the center. So instead of being hierarchical, you can link anything to anything else. And I found that it's great on the one hand if you approach it in that way.
Yeah.
Naturally, I want to put everything into a structure that I can remember. And in your book, I never heard the term before. I think you say personal taxonomy or something like that.
Well, I like. Yeah, personal unifying taxonomy.
And when I read that, I thought, I have that in my head, and in a tool that allows me to do anything, I find myself not doing everything because I like to have it in my structure. So that's why I keep abandoning it and going back to more linear tools.
Yeah. I personally, I find it disorienting in a way that it's shifting the view for you. And so that's part of a basic problem I have is that I want to have a sense of going to it rather than having it come into view always in front and center. And then I think it's just too easy to get yourself into knots with it because it's too easy to make links that don't make any sense after a while. Yeah.
Along those lines, have you seen Inksane?
I did. I saw it. I saw a demo. I saw. I think the developer showed me, or the guy that was working on it.
How long ago was it?
When was that? That was when I came to talk at Eric. Raman. That's right. Yeah. He was. I remember he was also especially interested in the Outlook stuff because he'd done some work on Outlook, and so he's curious to know how. I mean, people that know about Outlook say, well, how did you do that linking into Outlook? Because it's not all that easy, and you have to be sort of sneaky about it. Yeah. So we can talk about that afterwards. I saw that, and it was certainly an interesting demo.
It's similar to this in the sense that you can create, it's similar to OneNote in some ways as well, right? You can create links in context, and you can also grab information elsewhere and put it in the context.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the tight integration with the file system that you have.
Yeah, it doesn't have that. Yeah. It has a different integration with search.
Yeah, we debated that over and over and over again, and we because it's not easy to keep integration with the file system. But what we found in our own surveys of people is that when they're required to go put all their trust in a separate database, they ultimately abandon it. And the file system is sort of there to stay, for better or worse.
How well does this kind of thing work when you've got it's more like a distributed set of documents? Like, you've got sort of file servers over here and other kinds of things where, you maybe don't have everything stored on this little box. If my files are, and structure is located in multiple servers.
Well, I don't know. A quick answer is that it works pretty well because of the way we've architected it. We had a debate early on, and one of the previous developers said, "Well, I think we're going to make this, database, and it'll be central." And I actually said, "No, that's not going to work because you just, you need to have this." So the way it works now, you can go out to we have this thing we call the N drive at the University of Washington that we have stuff on, and you can build a plan out there as easily as anywhere else. Now,
You just have to be able to write to it, it's basically.
you can write to it, yeah. You kind of have to. But the other thing, I mean, so where are we going with this? There's some interesting things that once you open the door, there are all sorts of things you can start to do. One thing that people have asked for is, well, why not have a little, if that represents a task, why not have a little flag like you have in Outlook that sort of represents it's flagged for completion, and then a check, that nice, satisfying check mark when you're done with it. And so that's an easy thing to do. That's like a no-brainer thing to do. And I mean, it's basically just cycling through 3 states. And then there's also make this go away. Archive it. I'm done with this. But I don't want to move it, because if I move it, I lose a lot of the representational richness that comes with it being where it is. So make it go away means that we just simply add a don't show flag to our XML representation. So it's still there in the file system, but we don't have to continually see it in the plan. So these are things that in the context of bringing information together and starting to add, sort of make it active. It's not just a static repository for your information. It's an active area that you can start to use for planning and thinking through things. Very, very exciting to us. And obviously this is only one of many possible overlays. There are many others that we could do. Workflow, mind mapping, those are all possible overlays. Yeah.
How did this handle versioning? Like if you see a file, at this point you want to remember some piece, and then later it gets changed. Mm-hmm. Are you going to lose that information?
Well, so
this is like a bookmark into the file system. So
yeah.
If the information you want to remember was in a particular version of the file, and then the file changes to lose that information, are you losing the information?
Yeah, I mean, these are actual pointers to, I mean, that's an actual file, and if you go underneath video 3 minute, you'll see there's an actual file there. I mean, we can go out there to the, I guess the short answer is it's the same, it's no different from what the problem you already have with, so way over there, I have too many things open. But, so if you, so let's see, where was that? What was that file called? I don't remember which one it was, but basically it's there. So it's in the file system. And so you have all the problems of versioning. But if you click on that, you'll get back to whatever that file currently is. Yeah. But we also do make explicit provision for, I mean, we all know that most of us still do file level versioning. There have been the best attempts to sort of build versioning into, say, Word have failed. People don't use that. They use file level versioning, and they have sort of ad hoc ways of representing that this is a version of that, like I put WJ at the end of a file, or maybe the date or something like that, or version 1 or 2. So we have a way of doing that here. We sort of say, I didn't show you that, but as I'm doing, the scenario I tried to illustrate, and I kind of ran out of time for it, is that I give a document to you, you give it back to me, I create a version of it, so I can create a version of this, for example, new version. It prompts me, and so I can say, well, this is actually WJ2. And then it creates that, and that's a new version. Okay, so and it has a nice little note here. We're still working with the notes. Maybe they're a little bit wordy, but it says version demo script WJ2 created from demo script JD1 on such and such a date. But the thing is, if I think that's pretty wordy, and I think I do, I can just change it to new version because it's just a document. Okay, so it's kind of that's the spirit of things. None of us are going to buy into a formal system like Microsoft Project for most of the projects that we actually do. So make it much more like a document. We're comfortable with working with documents and make it like that.
Can I cut and paste this and have it reflected in the file system? So can I open up a new task and cut and paste parts of this one into it? What happens then?
Well, we've talked about that. That's not a feature that we're supporting yet. We only do text level cut and paste right now because you sort of get into sort of you have to support the clipboard with a more complicated object, and so we don't do that yet. Yeah. Okay. Well, it sounds like we're. Yeah. Thank you. Good comments.